My neighbor blocked my path at the mailboxes and said, "Why do you keep avoiding me, Jack?" And I looked at Emily Carter, pale, tired eyes, a coffee mug trembling in her hands, and my chest locked up like a door slammed from the inside, because looking at you hurts. I'm Jack Miller, former Navy SEAL. I came home to Spokane for quiet and ended up living beside the one face that drags me back into a rainy highway, a 10-year-old boy's fading grip, and a promise I never delivered. For months, I've mastered disappearing the second Emily steps outside. Porch. I go in. Fence wave. I check my truck. Grocery store. Different aisle. Every time. But today, she trapped me between the hedge and cold metal boxes where I couldn't run without shoving her aside. Rex, my silent German shepherd, stood at my heel, watching her like he could smell truth on the wind. Emily leaned in and whispered, "Tell me what you're hiding." And I realized she didn't move in next door by accident. Cold October rain drifted over Spokane, Washington, soft as ash. Streetlights turned the wet pavement into a ribbon of bronze, and every porch looked peaceful, until you listened close enough to hear what people hid behind their doors. Jack Miller lived in the kind of neighborhood real estate agents described as quiet and safe. The sort of place where lawn sprinklers had schedules, and the loudest drama was a trash bin knocked over by wind. Jack didn't believe in safe, not after the sea, the sand, the long, dark corridors of training, and the kind of work where silence could save you or bury you. He was 42, white, tall, broad-shouldered, built the way old oak trees are built, dense and stubborn, shaped by storms. His face was angular, with a square jaw and a straight nose that looked like it had been broken once and repaired with impatience. A neatly trimmed beard framed his mouth and at his temples. A few silver threads glinted under porch light, like winter sneaking into autumn. His eyes were dark brown, warm when he chose to be human, sharp when the world insisted on being dangerous. Jack's left knee carried its own weather forecast. It stiffened before storms, a quiet reminder that bodies remember what minds try to forget. He walked with a subtle rigidity, nothing dramatic, nothing that invited pity, just enough to make you notice if you were the kind of person who noticed details. And Jack noticed everything, because once you've been trained to read a room like a map, you never really stop. He wore the same thing most days, as if consistency could hold his life together. A red and black plaid flannel shirt, faded jeans, and low brown leather boots. Not for style, for armor, for ritual, for the comfort of being predictable in a mind that still kept scanning for threats that weren't there. Except sometimes they were. At his side moved Rex. Rex was 5, a German shepherd with a black saddle of fur across his back and tan along his legs and face like sunlight clinging to a shadow. His ears stood upright, always listening, always collecting the world. His amber-brown eyes were too intelligent for comfort, the kind that made strangers feel as if they'd been politely judged and found suspicious. He didn't bark much. Rex was the quiet kind of guardian, the kind that didn't waste noise on warnings. He watched. He measured. He decided. Jack liked that about him. It felt familiar. It felt like home. They stepped onto the porch together. Jack's hand touched the railing out of habit, like checking the edge of a cliff. Rex paused at the top step, nose lifting, tasting the air. Rain, wet leaves, distant engine oil, and something else. Next door, a light flickered on. Jack's chest tightened before his mind could name why. He turned, not fully, just enough to confirm what he already suspected. Emily Carter's porch. She'd moved in months ago, and Jack could still remember the first day the moving truck arrived like an unwanted memory. Boxes carried inside, curtains shifted, a life trying to begin again in a place that didn't know what it was inheriting. Emily was in her late 30s, pale-skinned, slim in a way that didn't look like dieting, It looked like grief forgetting to feed you. Her hair, a soft chestnut brown, was pulled into a messy knot at the back of her head. Even from this distance, Jack could see the tiredness in her posture, the way her shoulders carried invisible weight. She was average height, but the sadness in her made her seem smaller, as if she was trying not to take up space in a world that had already taken too much from her. She opened her door and stepped out with a mug in her hand, the steam rising like a small, stubborn prayer. Rex looked at her, not hostile, not attentive. Emily glanced over and lifted her hand in a cautious wave, polite as a neighbor should be. His body did what it had done for months. No debate, no discussion. He stepped back into his house as if he'd forgotten something important. The door inside, the air smelled like black coffee and wood polish, and the faint metallic tang of old memories. Jack stood still for a moment, staring at nothing. His heart was beating too loud, too fast, like it was trying to warn him about a danger that wore a sweater and held a mug. Rex sat by the door, calm, watching Jack instead of the world now. Jack rubbed a hand over his jaw, feeling the bristle of his beard. He could still see the wave in his mind, still feel the way his chest had tightened. It wasn't fear of Emily. It was fear of what she carried, and what he carried back. Jack crossed the living room, the floorboards creaking under his boots. He moved like someone trying not to wake a sleeping monster. On the wall was nothing personal, nothing that suggested a past. No medal, no framed photos, no flags folded into triangles. If someone walked into Jack Miller's house, they'd think he'd just moved in too. That was the point. He kept his life pared down to the basics. Function. Quiet. Survival. Anything else felt like temptation. He stopped at the window and peeked through the blinds. Just a sliver. Emily stood on her porch, looking toward his house like she was trying to understand an invisible riddle. She took a sip from her mug, then lowered it slowly, her face tightening as if she'd tasted something bitter. Jack felt the old pressure in his ribs, the kind that didn't belong to rain or cold. Guilt had a weight. It sat in him like a stone. Months of avoidance had become a routine as precise as a mission schedule. If Emily was outside, Jack found a reason to be inside. If she was at the fence, Jack suddenly needed to check his truck. If she was at the grocery store, Jack developed an urgent fascination with a different aisle. He told himself he was being respectful. He told himself he was giving her space. He told himself a lot of things. But the truth was simply uglier. Emily Carter's face was a doorway, and behind it was a boy's voice he could never forget. 10 years old, a laugh that tried to be brave, a hand that had gone slack in his. Jack exhaled slowly, the sound rough. Rex stood and pressed his head gently against Jack's thigh, not demanding, not dramatic, just there. Jack rested a hand on Rex's neck, feeling the thick fur, the steady warmth, the living certainty of a creature that didn't ask questions. Not today, Jack murmured, though he wasn't sure if he was talking to Rex or to himself. Outside, Emily's porch light clicked off. The world moved on. Jack stayed frozen anyway, because some wars don't end when you come home. Sometimes they move next door, pour coffee in the rain, and wave like they don't know they're holding your breathing hostage. And tomorrow morning, Jack already knew what he would do. He would avoid her again, like a man dodging a ghost he didn't have permission to speak to. The mailbox question. Morning came to Spokane like a reluctant confession. Gray sky, cold breath of wind, and the faint smell of wet cedar drifting off the trees. The neighborhood looked harmless in daylight, the kind of place where people waved with coffee cups and believed that routine could protect them from catastrophe. Jack Miller didn't trust routine. He only used it the way a man uses a shield. Tight grip, no illusions. He stepped outside with Rex at his heel. The German shepherd moved without sound. Black and tan coat, clean against the gloom. Ears tall and alert. Rex's gaze swept the street the way Jack's mind swept a room. Windows. Corners. Shadows. Patterns. No barking, no fuss. Just the quiet competence of something built to guard. Jack's left knee protested as he took the porch steps. He ignored it. Pain was just a language his body spoke when the weather changed, or when memory decided to. He headed toward the cluster of mailboxes at the corner. A few neighbors were already there. Mrs. Delaney, an elderly woman with silver hair pinned in a neat bun and a cardigan that looked as soft as her voice, smiled at Jack like he was a grandson she refused to give up on. "Morning, Jack," she called. Gentle, but persistent. Jack nodded. Polite. "Morning, ma'am." Mrs. Delaney glanced at Rex. "That dog of yours is handsome." Rex blinked slowly, unimpressed by compliments. "He knows," Jack said, and for a second his mouth almost formed something like humor. A pickup truck rolled past, music low. Somewhere a lawn sprinkler clicked on, as if it had never heard of grief. Jack reached the mailboxes and stopped. Emily Carter was there. She stood in front of his box, as if she'd been waiting for a bus, hands shoved into the pockets of an oversized sweater. Her hair was down this morning, chestnut brown, slightly wavy, damp at the ends like she'd showered and forgotten to care. In daylight, Jack could see the faint shadows under her eyes. The pale skin stretched tight over cheekbones that looked too sharp for someone her age. She wasn't fragile in the way people assumed grief made you fragile. She was brittle. There was a difference. Emily turned when she heard his boots. Her green eyes locked on his face, steady and tired, like she'd reached the end of patience and found something harder underneath it. Rex shifted his weight, still silent, but closer. Jack's pulse kicked. He tried to angle past her without stopping. A simple sidestep, a practiced vanish. Emily moved with him. "Jack," she said. His name sounded different in her mouth than it did in anyone else's. Less neighborly, more intimate, like she'd been saying it privately for a long time. He stopped because his body had already calculated the alternatives and found none that wouldn't look like cowardice. He forced his face neutral. "Morning," he said. Emily stared at him for a long moment, then let out a breath that trembled at the end. "Why do you keep avoiding me?" The question landed clean and heavy. No decoration. Not angry. Not pleading. Just exhausted truth. Jack's eyes flicked to the street, to the trees, to anywhere but her face. Emily stepped closer, blocking his angle to retreat, and Jack realized she'd learned his pattern. 6 months of dodging had taught her the choreography. "I moved here thinking I could start over," she continued. "But you act like I'm something you can't touch, like I'm contagious." Jack's grip tightened around the small key ring in his pocket. Metal edges bit his palm. Rex's head tilted, watching Emily with a calm intensity. His amber eyes were neither friendly nor hostile, just aware, like a judge waiting to see who would cross the line. Emily noticed him and gave a brief, humorless half smile. "Even your dog looks like he's deciding whether I'm safe." Rex blinked once. Jack swallowed. His throat felt sandpapered from the inside. "He's trained," Jack said automatically, then regretted it. It sounded too military, too sharp, too much like a door slamming. Emily's expression softened for a heartbeat, then hardened again. "I'm not asking about your dog," she said. "I'm asking about you." Jack stared at the mailbox numbers, as if they could offer him a script. He couldn't keep doing this. Avoiding her wasn't protecting either of them. It was just feeding the same wound, day after day, until it festered into something permanent. He finally looked up. Emily's eyes didn't blink, and the moment he met them, his chest tightened exactly the way it had the first time, because grief had a face. And sometimes it lived next door. Jack's voice came out low, "Because looking at you hurts." Emily's lips parted slightly, as if she hadn't expected honesty. "Hurts," she echoed. "What does that even mean? What did I do to you?" Jack's mind flashed with images he tried not to keep. Rain on asphalt, the smell of gasoline, the pale glare of headlights, a small hand gripping his, slipping away. He felt his knee throb. He felt his heart throb harder. Rex leaned subtly closer to Jack's leg, a silent anchor. Jack exhaled. 3 years ago, he began. Emily went still. Jack spoke carefully, like he was diffusing something that could explode if he chose the wrong word. Tuesday night. Rain. Highway accident. Emily's fingers tightened in her pockets. Her face went pale, as if her skin had learned that story and was trying to run away before her mind caught up. Jack continued anyway. There was a boy, he said, 10 years old. Emily's eyes widened, and something like shock passed through her, not because she didn't know, but because she'd hoped, against all logic, that he wasn't talking about that. Jack's voice cracked slightly when he said the name. Ethan. Emily's breath hitched, sharp and small. Jack pushed forward before he could stop. I was the one who got to him first, he said. I held him. I tried. His jaw clenched, the old habit of discipline fighting the new reality of emotion. I tried to keep him here. Emily stared at him as if the air itself had become thin. Rex finally made a sound, not a bark, not a growl, just a low, brief huff, like he was marking the moment, like he understood that something sacred had been spoken aloud. Jack's eyes burned, but he refused to let tears fall. He'd learned long ago that once you let a crack form, water finds its way in. He kept his voice steady. And then you moved in next door, he finished. And every time I see you, I'm back on that road, back in that rain, back with Ethan's hand in mine. Emily's mouth trembled. You, she whispered. You were there. Jack nodded once. Emotion so small it felt like surrender. Emily took a step back, as if she needed space to keep from collapsing. The neighborhood sounds continued around them. Birds. Distant traffic, someone's garage door opening, oblivious to the fact that 2 lives were splitting open beside a row of mailboxes. Emily swallowed hard. So that's it, she said, voice thin. That's why you couldn't even say hello. Jack couldn't answer with anything that would make it better. He just stood there, shoulders heavy, eyes on the ground. Rex stayed close, silent and unwavering, like a sentinel at the edge of a battlefield. Emily looked at Jack one last time, and in her face Jack saw something he hadn't expected. Not blame, not hatred, but recognition. Deep, old recognition. Like she'd been living with the same moment on repeat, too. She whispered, almost to herself. I knew it. Jack's head snapped up. What? Emily didn't answer. Not yet. She only turned slightly, as if she'd reached the limit of what she could say out loud in public. And as she stepped away, Jack realized something terrifying. This wasn't the end of the truth. It was the beginning. The name that wouldn't let go. The rest of the morning didn't move like morning should. Spokane kept breathing. Cars passing. A sprinkler ticking. Someone's dog yapping 3 houses down. But Jack Miller stood beside the mailboxes as if the air had thickened into glass. Emily Carter's whisper, I knew it, kept circling his skull like a warning flare that refused to burn out. He watched her walk away with slow, careful steps, shoulders tight beneath her sweater, as though the simple act of leaving might snap something inside her. Rex stayed pressed to Jack's leg, silent. Amber eyes tracking Emily until she turned the corner, then flicking back to Jack as if to ask a question no animal should need to ask. Are we safe? Or are we just pretending again? Jack's jaw clenched. He opened his mailbox with hands that didn't feel like his. The envelopes inside looked ordinary. Utility bill, grocery flyer, a postcard with a cartoon moose. Yet they weighed like bricks. Ordinary paper, extraordinary guilt. He told himself to walk back home, shut the door, and bury the morning under coffee and drills and silence. But his body didn't turn. He stood there until he heard footsteps returning over wet pavement. Emily came back, not rushing, not dramatic, just deliberate, like a woman walking into a storm she'd already survived once and decided she could survive again. Up close, Jack could see her hands were trembling, and the skin around her nails was raw, as if she'd been picking at herself for months without noticing. Her hair had slipped loose at the temples. Damp strands clung to her cheek. Her eyes were rimmed red, not fresh crying, but the kind that comes from living with tears as a constant background noise. She stopped 2 arm lengths away, keeping distance like it might keep her upright. "You said his name," she murmured. "Ethan." Jack swallowed. "I shouldn't have." "No," Emily said, voice firm despite the shake in it. "You should have. I've waited 3 years to hear someone else say it like he was real, like he wasn't just a word on a report. That landed harder than any accusation could have." Jack's chest tightened. He noticed Rex subtly shift, placing his body between Jack and the street, ears angled toward the neighborhood's quiet corners, guarding, always guarding. Emily's gaze flicked to Rex. "He's loyal," she said, almost like she was testing the word on her tongue. "He is," Jack answered. Then, before he could stop himself, he added, "He doesn't leave things unfinished." Emily's mouth twitched at that, something that wasn't quite a smile, but wasn't nothing either. "Neither do I," she said. "Tell me." Jack's stomach dropped. "Emily, tell me what happened," she insisted. And now her voice carried a sharper edge. Not anger, but necessity. Not the sanitized version. Not the report version. The real one. "I can't keep filling the blanks with nightmares." Jack stared at her for a long moment, measuring the damage his words could do. There were truths that freed you, and truths that crushed you. Sometimes they were the same truth, just different weight depending on who carried it. He glanced down at Rex. The shepherd looked up at him, calm and steady, like a teammate waiting for a command. Jack breathed in, slow. "Not here," he said. "Too many ears." Emily nodded once, grateful for the small mercy of privacy. They walked 2 houses down, then across the street to a narrow strip of public green where a maple tree leaned over a bench. The rain had eased into mist. Jack sat stiffly, boots planted, shoulders squared, like he was still in a briefing room. Emily sat at the far end of the bench, hands clasped tight between her knees. Rex remained standing, close to Jack's left side, scanning the park with quiet discipline. A couple pushing a stroller passed on the sidewalk. Emily's eyes followed them too long, then dropped to the ground as if she'd been burned by the sight. Jack began without flourish, because flourish would have been disrespectful to a dead child and to the living grief in front of him. "It was Highway 2, he said, "near the bend by the old lumber yard." Emily's breath caught at the location, as if the map in her mind snapped into place. "A truck crossed the line," Jack continued. "Not fast, just wrong. Like someone made one bad decision and the universe decided to cash it in." He paused, jaw tightening. "When I got there was steam rising off the hood like the car was trying to exhale. Rain everywhere. Glass on asphalt. The smell of gasoline." Emily closed her eyes briefly, then forced them open. She wouldn't let herself look away. Jack's voice lowered. Ethan was in the back seat, seatbelt on. His face had a cut at the brow, small, but bleeding a lot because the scalp bleeds like a faucet. His eyes were open. Emily's fingers dug into her own knuckles. "He was awake," she whispered. Jack nodded. "Yeah, and that's the part that stays." His throat worked. He was scared, but he didn't want me to know he was scared. He tried to joke. He asked if ambulances had snacks. Then he said, Jack's voice cracked so slightly he hated himself for it. He said he needed to be home by Thursday because his Little League team needed him. Emily's face crumpled and she made a sound that wasn't a sob yet, just a breath that broke. Jack pressed on, because stopping would be cowardice. "I told him he was going to be okay," he said. "It was what I always said. It was what I said even when I didn't know." Emily's eyes glistened. "Did you know?" she asked. "Small." Jack swallowed. "I knew it was bad," he admitted. "But I also knew he could hear me. So I kept my voice steady. I kept my hands steady. I kept him focused on me. He stared at his own palms as if they carried ghosts. "He asked for you," Jack said. He kept saying "Mom," like the word was a rope he could hold on to. Emily's shoulders shook. "I should have been there," she whispered. The old poison rising. Jack's head snapped up, his dark eyes suddenly sharp. "No," he said, firm. "Don't do that." The command in his tone surprised even him. Emily blinked at him. Jack softened, but not his conviction. "That road didn't give you a choice," he said. "And Ethan? He wasn't angry. He was just wanting you." Emily's lips trembled. "What did he say?" Jack looked away toward the damp grass. "He said," Jack whispered, "that you'd be mad if he missed school picture day. Like he was worried about the smallest things, because the big thing was too heavy." Emily let out a broken laugh that turned into a sob. Even grief, it seemed, had room for absurdity. The way a child could face the end and still worry about a photo. Jack waited until her breathing steadied a fraction. Rex sat down without being told, close enough that his warmth brushed Jack's boot. A quiet anchor. Jack continued, voice raw now, in the ambulance. His pulse started slipping. I kept talking to him. He squeezed my hand, hard, like he was trying to prove he was still there. Then he looked at me, and he said, "Can you tell my mom I love her?" Emily covered her mouth, tears spilling over. Jack's eyes stung. "He said it like it was a job he needed done," Jack added, a faint, painful humor slipping through. Like I was the delivery guy, and that message was the most important package in the world. Emily sobbed, but she nodded, because she understood. Jack stared at the sky, gray and endless. "I told him I would," he said. "I promised." He swallowed hard, and then his hand went weaker. His eyes got tired, and the machine started yelling at me. Emily's voice came out ragged. "And you?" Jack's face tightened. I did compressions. I did everything. I did it until my shoulders burned and my arms felt like they were made of stone. And it didn't matter. Silence fell, thick as fog. The stroller couple was gone. The neighborhood sounds were distant now, like life had politely stepped back to let death speak. Emily wiped her cheeks with shaking fingers. When she looked at Jack again, her eyes weren't accusing. They were haunted in the same way his were. "So you've been carrying that," she said softly, "every day." Jack's laugh came out without joy. "Like a sentence," he said. "Like if I punish myself long enough, it'll balance the scales." Emily stared at him, and for a moment, she looked older than her years. Like grief had carved wisdom into her bones. "It doesn't," she whispered. Jack's gaze dropped. "I know." Then Emily leaned forward slightly, as if stepping into a sacred circle. "And you avoided me," she said. "Because when you see me, you hear him." Jack nodded once, unable to deny it. Emily's voice trembled, but it held a new steadiness, an ember under ash. "Jack," she said, "I don't know what to do with this, but I can't keep doing it alone." Jack's throat tightened. He wanted to say he couldn't do it with her either. He wanted to run. But Rex shifted closer, calm and immovable. And Jack felt, just for a second, the possibility that staying might be braver than fleeing. Emily drew in a shaky breath. "You promised him," she said. "Tell me the message." Jack's eyes lifted to hers. The moment stretched, heavy and holy. And Jack finally nodded, surrendering to the truth he'd avoided for 3 years. "He loved you," he said. "He wanted you to know he wasn't scared." Emily broke then, quietly, completely, but she didn't turn away. And Jack, for the first time since that rainy highway, didn't turn away either. The quiet threat. The mist thinned by late afternoon, leaving Spokane washed clean and sharp-edged, as if the whole city had been scrubbed with cold water. Jack Miller walked Emily back toward the cluster of houses with the steady, measured pace of a man escorting someone through a minefield he could see and she couldn't. He kept his shoulders square, his voice low, and his attention wide. Because even after the truth had been spoken, the world didn't suddenly become gentle. Rex moved beside him like a shadow that had learned discipline, black and tan coat catching pale light, ears pricked, eyes scanning. Emily's hands were tucked into her sleeves. She looked smaller than she had at the bench, as if grief had wrung her out and left her hollow. Yet there was something new in her gaze, too. Something like relief that hurt, the way a muscle aches when it's finally allowed to unclench. They reached the sidewalk between their houses. Emily paused at her driveway, glancing toward her porch as if she half expected Ethan to burst out the door with a baseball glove and a grin. The porch was empty. The quiet hit her again. Jack saw it in the subtle wobble of her stance. He didn't touch her, didn't presume, but he stayed close enough that she didn't have to stand alone in it. "Thank you," Emily said, voice rough. Jack's jaw tightened. "Don't thank me," he replied. "I should have told you years ago." Emily gave a brittle half laugh. "You didn't owe me years ago. You owe yourself now." The words landed like a strange blessing. Jack didn't know how to accept it. A car door slammed down the street. Both Jack and Rex turned at the same time. 3 young men had stepped out of an older sedan parked half crooked along the curb, the kind of vehicle that had survived on bad decisions and cheap repairs. They moved with lazy confidence, the swagger of people who believed the world existed for their entertainment. The first one, tall and thin, with a buzz cut and a hoodie that hung off his shoulders like he'd borrowed it from someone bigger, kept rolling something between his fingers. Maybe a coin, maybe just the habit of needing to look busy. The second, broader, with a patchy beard and sharp cheekbones, wore a smirk like it was part of his face. The third was shorter, stockier, with a narrow face and restless eyes that darted too fast. He kept glancing around as if he expected applause. They didn't look like monsters. Most trouble never does. They started walking toward Emily's driveway, laughing at something that didn't sound funny. Emily stiffened. Jack felt the shift in her before she moved, her shoulders pulling in, her breath tightening, her body remembering how to become small. It wasn't fear like a sudden scream. It was fear like an old scar aching before a storm. Rex didn't bark. He didn't growl either. He simply stepped half a pace forward, placing himself subtly between the approaching men and Emily, his posture calm but loaded, like a coiled spring wrapped in velvet. His ears stayed upright, his amber eyes fixed on the trio with a steady, unblinking assessment that made the air feel heavier. Jack's voice came out level, almost conversational. "Emily, go inside." Emily hesitated, pride and shock tangling on her face. "Jack, inside," he repeated. Softer, but with the kind of authority that didn't invite debate. Emily swallowed, then took one step back toward her porch. She didn't run. She didn't look away. She just moved, as if trusting him was suddenly the only clear choice she had. The tall one called out, grinning, "Hey, new lady. You live here alone." The way he said it, alone, was the kind of word that made Jack's blood cool instead of heat. Heat made people sloppy. Cool kept them alive. Jack stepped forward, planting his boots on the sidewalk like he was anchoring the ground. Red and black flannel, faded jeans, brown boots. Nothing about him screamed danger to people who only understood danger when it was loud. But his stillness did. His eyes did. The way he didn't fidget, didn't perform, didn't puff up like a threatened dog. He just stood there, tall and unmovable, a wall that had learned patience. "Afternoon," Jack said. Patchybeard smirked wider. "Who are you supposed to be?" "Her boyfriend." He said boyfriend like it was a joke. The stocky one laughed too loudly, like laughter could turn them into a pack. Rex shifted his weight again. Small movement, massive meaning. Not aggressive, just ready. Jack didn't glance at Rex. He didn't need to. They moved like a unit, without looking, the way soldiers did when they trusted each other with their lives. Jack kept his gaze on the men. "You're on my street," he said. "You're bothering my neighbor. Keep walking." Buzzcut tilted his head. "Or what?" He tried to sound brave, but his eyes flicked to Rex, then back to Jack, recalculating. Jack's mouth barely moved. "Or you'll regret the next 30 seconds of your day." It wasn't a threat shouted into the air. It was a fact placed on the table. Patchybeard's smile faltered. Big talk for a guy in a lumberjack shirt. Jack almost smiled. "Almost. I've worn worse," he said, and the dryness in his tone carried a sliver of something that could have been humor if it weren't so sharp. Emily had reached her porch steps now. She stood there, frozen, one hand gripping the railing. Her face was pale, but her eyes were locked on Jack with something fierce and frightened mixed together. She wanted to help. She didn't know how. The stocky one took a step closer, eyes narrowing. "That dog gonna bite me," he sneered, trying to test the line. Rex didn't move. That was the terrifying part. His silence wasn't uncertainty. It was control. Jack's voice stayed calm. "Don't step closer," he said. The tall one laughed again, but it was thinner now. "Man, you're really serious." Jack's left knee ached, but his balance didn't shift. He'd held positions longer under worse conditions. He'd faced men with guns and hatred and ideology carved into their bones. 3 local punks didn't register as fear. They registered as a problem to contain. Patchybeard glanced toward Emily's house, then back to Jack. "We just wanted to welcome her," he said, trying to sound innocent. Jack nodded once, slow. "Welcome from the sidewalk," he replied. "And then you leave." Buzzcut rolled his shoulders, trying to regain swagger. "You some kind of cop?" he asked. Jack's eyes darkened. No. That single word hung heavy, because it meant something else. It meant Jack wasn't limited by badges or paperwork. It meant he was limited only by the line he chose not to cross. Rex's gaze remained locked, unblinking. His amber eyes looked almost gentle, until you noticed the tension in his frame. The quiet readiness like a door with a deadbolt half turned. The stocky one muttered something under his breath. Patchybeard's smirk died completely. They were realizing, in real time, that this wasn't a man to play with, and this wasn't a dog to test. They backed up, one step, then another. Buzzcut tried one last insult, because pride hates retreat. Whatever. Man. Freak and his wolf. Jack didn't move. He just watched them. Calm, patient, unyielding. When they reached their sedan, the stocky one glanced back at Rex, then quickly looked away. The door slammed. Tires hissed on wet pavement. They were gone. The street exhaled. Emily remained on her porch, trembling. Jack turned toward her slowly, keeping his movements measured so he didn't startle her further. Rex's posture softened a fraction, though he still watched the street the way a lighthouse watches water. Emily's voice came out shaky. "What was that?" Jack walked to the base of her steps, stopping at a respectful distance. "Just idiots," he said. "The kind that look for soft targets." Emily flinched at the phrase, soft targets. Jack regretted it instantly. He had spent too long around the language of threat. He didn't want to hand her more fear. "I don't want you thinking this neighborhood is dangerous," he added quietly, "but I do want you aware." Emily's eyes filled again, not just with fear, but with something else. Anger, maybe, or humiliation that she'd frozen, or gratitude she didn't know where to put. "Your dog," she whispered, looking at Rex. He didn't even bark. Rex looked up at Emily for a brief moment, then back to the street, as if saying, "Noise is for people who don't know what they can do." Jack's voice was low. "Rex doesn't make threats," he said. "He makes decisions." Emily hugged herself. "And you?" she asked. Jack's face tightened, the square lines of it becoming harder. "I learned a long time ago," he said, "that bullies count on people to look away." He paused, then added, softer, almost to himself, "I don't look away anymore. Emily's breath trembled. She stepped down one stair, closer, and her voice dropped to a whisper that carried more weight than any scream. "You protected me," she said. Jack's eyes flickered with discomfort. Protection felt too close to penance, too close to trying to balance a scale that couldn't be balanced. "I was right there," he replied. "That's all." Emily stared at him for a moment, then nodded slowly, as if filing that away with the rest of the truths she was collecting. "I'm not going to be scared of them," she said, more to convince herself than him. "But thank you." Jack gave a single nod. "Go inside," he said gently. "Lock the door, and if you see that car again, you call me." Emily hesitated. "And if I call, you'll come?" Jack's answer was immediate. Yes, because some promises, even broken once, still mattered. Emily went inside. The door closed. Jack remained on the sidewalk, rain beginning again as a faint drizzle, cooling his face like a reminder. Rex sat beside him, steady and silent. Jack stared down the street where the sedan had disappeared, and for the first time in 3 years, he felt something shift inside him. Not forgiveness, not peace, but a new kind of resolve. If he couldn't save Ethan, he could at least refuse to let the world take more from Emily. And that was a reason to stop hiding. The hurt that heals. Night settled over Spokane with the slow patience of something ancient, and the rain returned in small, deliberate taps against Jack Miller's windows, like a knuckle on a door that wouldn't stop asking to be opened. The street outside had gone quiet after the sedan disappeared, but Jack's nerves stayed awake, stretched thin the way they used to be on deployments, listening for sounds that didn't belong. Rex lay near the front door, head up, ears occasionally twitching, not asleep so much as resting, in a state of readiness. Jack stood in his kitchen with a mug of coffee he hadn't touched, staring at nothing. His flannel shirt still smelled faintly of damp air and wet leaves. His left knee ached. His jaw ached. And somewhere deeper, the old ache, Ethan's name, throbbed like a bruise that never fully faded. He told himself he'd done what any decent man would do, put himself between Emily and danger, send her inside, watch the street until it was empty again. Yet the moment the door of her house had closed, a different kind of fear had risen in him. Not fear of punks in a sedan, but fear of connection. Fear that he'd stepped too close to a life he didn't deserve. Fear that if he let himself care, he'd lose again, and this time, he wouldn't get back up. A soft knock came at his front door. Rex rose in one smooth motion, silent as smoke, his amber eyes fixed on the door. He did not bark. He did not growl. He simply became a presence that made the air feel guarded. Jack's hand moved without thinking, not to a weapon. He didn't keep one near the door, but to Rex's neck, fingers sinking into thick fur, as if touching something real could anchor him. "Easy," he murmured. Though Rex had not done a single thing that needed easing, Jack crossed the living room and opened the door. Emily stood on his porch. In the porch light, she looked paler than she had in daylight, her skin almost translucent around her cheekbones. Her chestnut hair had been brushed back, but kept slipping loose at the sides, giving her a slightly unmade look, like someone who'd tried to look composed and failed because life wouldn't allow it. She wore the same oversized sweater, sleeves pulled down over her hands. Her posture was upright, but her eyes were tired, red-rimmed, and brave in a way that wasn't loud. Brave like a person walking into pain because avoiding it had finally become worse. "I'm sorry," she said quietly, as if apologizing for existing. "I know it's late. I couldn't sleep." Jack stepped back to let her in. "You're fine," he said. Then realized fine was the most useless word in the English language, and added, "Come in." Emily entered as if crossing a threshold mattered. She glanced at Rex, and Rex glanced at her, two creatures measuring one another. Emily's mouth twitched. "He's intimidating," she whispered. Rex sat, composed. as if the word didn't apply to him. "He's not intimidating," Jack said, then paused. "He's honest." Emily nodded, like that made sense. She followed Jack into the kitchen, where the only light came from a small lamp that cast warm gold on worn countertops. Jack gestured to a chair. Emily sat slowly, fingers clasped so tightly her knuckles looked white. Jack poured water into the kettle, more for something to do than because tea would solve anything. The silence between them wasn't empty. It was crowded with what they both knew and what they still couldn't say without breaking. Emily took a breath. "About earlier," she started. Jack's shoulders tightened. "You shouldn't have had to deal with those guys." Emily shook her head. "That's not what I mean." Her voice trembled, then steadied. "I mean, about why I moved here." Jack turned slightly, leaning against the counter. He stayed standing, as if sitting would make him too vulnerable. Rex lay down near Jack's boots, a silent guard at the base of the world. Emily looked at her hands. "You probably think I'm cruel," she said. "Buying the house next door and not telling you I knew." Jack's throat tightened. "I don't think you're cruel," he said, and surprised himself by meaning it. Emily swallowed. "I didn't plan it," she said. "Not like some revenge story. I was looking for a place that didn't have Ethan everywhere. His room, his shoes by the door, his little notes on the fridge. I couldn't breathe in that house anymore." Her eyes lifted to Jack's, pleading for him to understand without judging. "My realtor showed me 3 places. This one was last. And when I saw your name on the mailbox," her voice cracked, "I felt like the universe shoved my face into the one question I'd never answered." Jack's brow furrowed. "What question?" Emily's laugh was quiet and broken. "Who was with him?" she said. "In the end, I knew the facts. I'd read the report until the words stopped looking like words. But facts don't tell you what kind of hands held your child. Facts don't tell you if someone spoke gently or if he was alone with strangers who didn't care." Her eyes filled again. "I needed to see you, not because I wanted to hate you, because I tried to hate someone. And it was killing me." She wiped a tear with the sleeve of her sweater. "I hated the driver. I hated the bar that served him. I hated God. I hated myself. But I never hated you. And that confused me." Jack's chest felt tight, like he couldn't take a full breath. "You should have," he said hoarsely. "I promised him I'd tell you, and I didn't." Emily's gaze sharpened. "Jack," she said, and there was strength now, the kind that grief forges when it's been hammered enough. "You were there. Do you understand what that means to a mother? For 3 years, my mind has tried to invent the last 10 minutes of Ethan's life. Every night, a different version. Some were worse than death. The only thing that ever soothed it was one line in your report, that he wasn't scared." She shook her head, tears spilling freely. "That line gave me sleep. Not peace, but sleep." Jack looked down, ashamed of how much he'd needed punishment. "I didn't save him," he whispered. Emily leaned forward slightly, as if closing distance mattered. "You saved something," she said. "You saved him from being alone." The kettle began to hiss softly, filling the room with a thin, domestic sound. Jack poured hot water into a mug and slid it toward Emily. She wrapped her hands around it as if warmth could hold her together. Emily's voice dropped. "And then," she admitted, "I stayed." Jack's eyes lifted. "Stayed." Emily nodded. At first, it was just watching. She looked embarrassed, then forced herself to keep going. Not in a creepy way, in a human way. "I'd see you leave early in the morning. I'd see you come home and sit in your truck like you couldn't make yourself walk inside. I'd see you shovel my driveway before I woke up when it snowed. Fix my mailbox hinge without saying a word. Leave groceries on my porch when I was sick." Her cheeks flushed, pale skin warming slightly. "You thought you were invisible. You weren't." Jack's throat tightened. He remembered those small acts, how they had felt like penance with a purpose. Something to do with the hands that couldn't save a boy. Emily's eyes glistened, and her voice became a whisper that was both terrifying and tender. "Somewhere in those months," she said, "I stopped trying to understand the paramedic who held my son, and I started caring about the man who lives next door." Jack's breath caught. Emily. He didn't know what to do with the word that was his name and her voice and a pull he'd denied. "I know," she said quickly, as if anticipating his fear. "It sounds wrong. It sounds like betrayal. Sometimes it feels like betrayal." She pressed a hand to her chest. "But when I look at you, it hurts for two reasons. One, because you remind me of Ethan. Two, because you remind me I'm still alive." She let out a shaking breath. "And being alive without him feels like I'm doing something I'm not allowed to do." Jack stared at her, feeling something inside him crack open. Not grief, but recognition. "I feel that," he admitted quietly. "Every time I laugh at something stupid on TV, I hear a voice in my head asking why I'm allowed to laugh when Ethan isn't." Emily's mouth trembled into a sad smile. "Exactly." Rex shifted and placed his head on Jack's boot, the simple weight of it grounding Jack in the present. Jack reached down automatically, fingers threading into fur. Rex's calm steadiness was a reminder. Life kept moving, not because it was cruel, but because it was alive. Emily watched that gesture, and something softened in her expression. "He trusts you," she said. Jack swallowed. "He had to," he replied. "We found each other when neither of us knew how to come home." Emily nodded slowly, absorbing the quiet confession. The room fell silent again. But it wasn't the same silence as before. This one felt like a doorway opening instead of a wall closing. Emily set the mug down. Her hands trembled, but she made herself speak. "I'm not asking you to be my answer," she said. "I'm not asking you to erase what happened. I'm not asking you to stop hurting." Her voice broke. "I'm just asking if we can stop running." Jack's heart hammered. He felt the old instinct to retreat, to disappear, to keep distance, like distance could prevent loss. But then he pictured Emily, alone in her house, fighting nightmares that rewrote Ethan's last moments. He pictured himself alone, punishing himself until there was nothing left. He pictured Rex at the door, always ready, always present, a creature that didn't understand the logic of self-destruction. Jack exhaled slowly, like a man stepping into cold water. "I don't know how," he admitted. Emily's eyes filled again, but she smiled. A small, genuine thing that looked like it had been missing from her face for years. "Me neither," she whispered. "But maybe we learn." Jack nodded once. Not a grand promise, not a movie speech, just a choice. "Okay," he said. And in that single word, something in the room shifted. The kind of shift that doesn't erase grief, but makes space beside it for something else. Emily stood, hesitation trembling through her body. Jack walked her to the door. On the porch, she paused, turning back. "Jack," she said softly. He met her gaze. "For what it's worth," she said, voice steady now. "I don't want you to punish yourself anymore. Ethan wouldn't want that." Jack's throat tightened. He couldn't speak. He only nodded. Emily stepped into the night and walked back to her house, shoulders still heavy but not quite as collapsed. Jack watched until her door closed. Rex stood beside him, silent, ears tuned to the street. Jack shut his own door, leaned his forehead against it for a brief moment, and felt the strange, painful truth settle into him like a seed. Some hurt was poison, but some hurt, if you let it be shared, was the beginning of healing. And for the first time in 3 years, Jack didn't feel the urge to disappear the next morning. There are miracles that don't fall like lightning from the sky. They come quietly, like a kitchen lamp still burning when everyone is asleep, like a nod from someone who thought they would never dare look directly at their pain again, like a hand placed on another hand, not to erase the loss, but to say, you don't have to carry it alone. And sometimes that's exactly how God works, not by turning back time, but by sending into our lives a person, a moment, an opportunity so that we can rise up without betraying the one who is gone. Perhaps God doesn't promise that we won't hurt, but He often places beside us very ordinary walking sticks. A neighbor who listens, a loyal dog guarding the door, a morning a little sunnier than yesterday, a truthful word that we thought we would never utter. If you're living through days where sadness feels like a wet coat you can't take off, remember, the miracle isn't forgetting. The miracle is still being able to love, still being able to be kind, still being able to move on, even with a heart full of stitches. Tomorrow, you still have to wash dishes, go grocery shopping, take your grandchildren to school, feed your pets, open the door to look at the sky. And it is in those little things that God sometimes whispers, "You're still here, you're still breathing, and therefore, you still have a chance to heal." If this story resonates with you, please do 3 small things to help us spread that miracle. Comment. Have you ever avoided someone because they reminded you of a painful memory? Share. Send this story to someone who needs a little hope. Subscribe. Subscribe to the channel so we can listen together to more healing stories. Gentle, profound, and full of humanity. And before you leave, may God be with you through the long nights. May He lift you up during the weary days. May He place peace in your heart as a reminder that you are not alone. You are not forgotten. And miracles are still coming in very ordinary ways. Amen.